What happens when a country decides the old rules no longer protect its future? And what if the real shock is not one law or one election, but 7 nations all moving in the same direction at once? If you want more clear, deep stories like this, hit like, subscribe, and share this video with one friend who loves the stories hiding behind the headlines. Across Europe and Asia, something is changing fast. Not in theory, not in think tank reports, in laws, in elections, in speeches, in border policy, in classrooms, in courts, and in the way governments talk about identity, belonging, and the limits of tolerance. For years, many leaders told their people that immigration, diversity, and integration were mostly problems of management. Build the right programs, spend enough money, encourage openness, give it time, and trust that the system will hold. But in country after country, the confidence has started to crack. Some governments say they waited too long to face hard realities. Others say they're trying to avoid the mistakes of their neighbors. Some are responding to terrorism, some to social fragmentation, some to pressure on welfare states, some to political backlash, some to fear of cultural erosion. And when you look at the map, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. Denmark, France, Italy, Japan, India, Czechia, and Poland are all sending the same broad message in different ways. The age of easy optimism is over. The state is taking back control. That does not mean these countries are identical. They are not. Their histories are different. Their legal systems are different. Their cultures are different. Even their goals are different. But they are all wrestling with the same deeper question. How much change can a nation absorb before people stop feeling like they live inside one shared civic story? That question is now shaping modern politics more than almost anything else. It shapes how leaders talk about borders. It shapes how voters think about schools, crime, religion, welfare, and public trust. It shapes who wins elections and who gets called extreme. And the most important part is this. The debate is no longer just about how many people enter a country. It is about what a country believes it must preserve if it wants to remain itself. To understand why this shift is so powerful, we need to begin with Denmark. Denmark is small, rich, orderly, and famous for social trust. For decades, it looked like one of the great success stories of the modern welfare state. A place where citizens accepted high taxes because they trusted the system and trusted each other. That trust was everything. It made universal services possible. It made daily life smoother. It made the country feel stable. But over time, Danish leaders became more willing to argue that large cultural gaps could strain that model. So Denmark moved in a harder direction. It tightened asylum policy. It pushed tougher naturalization rules. It took direct aim at neighborhoods officials described as parallel societies. Supporters said the country was defending the social glue that made Denmark work in the first place. Critics said Denmark was letting fear drive law. But whether people admired it or hated it, one thing was clear. Denmark stopped pretending the issue would solve itself. France came to a similar point for very different reasons. The French Republic is built on a fierce idea of public secularism. In the French model, the state does not organize society around religious communities. It organizes society around citizenship. The Republic comes first. For a long time, that idea seemed strong enough to contain every tension. But attacks, radical networks, and repeated public fights over schools, speech, and religious authority changed the tone. French leaders increasingly argued that the real danger was organized pressure against Republican norms. That fear helped drive anti-separatism laws, stronger oversight of associations, and tighter scrutiny of networks. To supporters, France was finally defending the Republic with the seriousness it deserved. To critics, the state was broadening a fight into a climate of suspicion around ordinary Muslims trying to live French lives. Then there is Italy, where the debate often sounds even more direct. In Italy, immigration has become tied to sovereignty itself. If the state cannot decide who enters and under which rules, then what exactly is sovereignty worth? That question has given enormous power to politicians who speak the language of borders, order, and national identity. Proposals involving face coverings and foreign funding of religious institutions all sit inside that larger story. Italy is arguing over whether a nation has the right to defend a common civic culture before fragmentation becomes permanent. Supporters say that is common sense. Critics say it often turns complex human questions into blunt political theater. Japan seems far away from all this, but in many ways it may be even more revealing. Japan does not face mass asylum flows like parts of Europe. Its refugee approvals remain low. Its Muslim population is still very small. But Japan feels pressure in a different way. It is aging fast. It needs workers. It knows the economic logic for opening up more. Yet there is a deep public fear that immigration would change the social character. In Japan, even a modest rise in visible foreign communities can trigger outsized anxiety because the society values order. Crime stories involving foreigners explode. Backlash against disruptive tourism spreads fast. Refugee policy remains extremely restrictive. Japan is reacting because it fears transformation before it begins. India enters this story through another door entirely. Its central struggle is about law, religion, and equal citizenship. For decades, India lived with separate personal law systems for different religious communities in areas like marriage. Supporters of reform argue that no modern democracy can call itself equal, while basic civil rights differ depending on a citizen's faith. That is why moves against instant triple talaq and the push for uniform civil code systems became so politically explosive. To supporters, this is overdue equality. One nation should not operate under different family law systems forever. To critics, it can look like a majority using the language of equality to rewrite minority life on its own terms. In India, the question is not just who belongs, it is who gets to define fairness in a deeply plural country. Czechia and Poland reveal something else again. Both countries watched the migration crisis that shook Western Europe. Their governments resisted redistribution quotas and pushed back against Brussels. They insisted that sovereignty includes the right to control admissions without being morally lectured by larger powers. For years, that stance drew criticism, but those governments kept pointing to public order and popular support at home. They also drew a sharp line between different kinds of migration. Both countries showed major solidarity toward Ukrainians while remaining strongly resistant to other migration routes. In their eyes, that proves the issue was never simply about hostility. It was about control and national discretion. Now here is why all of this matters so much. These 7 countries are not just changing policy. They are changing the emotional grammar of politics. They are teaching voters to think in terms of limits and cohesion. Once that shift happens, every issue starts to look different. Crime becomes a question of integration. Schools become a question of identity. Welfare becomes a question of social trust. Birth rates become part of the story of national survival. And once politics starts speaking that language, it becomes much harder to return to the older language of automatic openness. That is why mainstream parties across many democracies have changed so much. The old fear was sounding too strict. Now the fear is sounding too weak. Leaders have learned that if they leave anxiety unanswered, someone else will answer it. So center-left parties harden migration policy. Liberals talk more about control. Conservatives tie identity to law and order. Nationalists go even further. The whole political field shifts. But there is a danger in that shift. When governments frame strain through visible difference, they risk training the public to confuse ordinary life with a threat. That is how a debate about integration can become a habit of suspicion. A mosque applying for permits, a student requesting accommodation, a family wearing religious clothing, a refugee seeking asylum, a foreign worker entering a small town. All can become symbols in a struggle they did not create. And once people become symbols, they stop being seen as individuals. That is the moral fault line of this story. Supporters of tougher policy say they are defending law, safety, social peace, and equal civic rules. Opponents say those same policies can become tools of exclusion that fall hardest on peaceful, law-abiding minorities. One side warns of fragmentation. The other warns of overreach. One says society breaks when there are no shared norms. The other says society breaks when the majority begins to police belonging too aggressively. Because both fears contain truth, the debate keeps growing. Let me put it more simply. These countries are trying to answer 3 brutal questions. How much difference can a society hold together? How much power should the state use to preserve cohesion? And how do you protect civic life without turning minorities into suspects? Pause here for a second, because this is the kind of story the headlines flatten. If you like slow, clear breakdowns that make sense of global shifts, subscribe now and tap the bell. Drop a comment with the country you want covered next. This channel is built for the bigger picture. Now let's go deeper, because the most important part of this story is the return of the nation-state as a moral actor. For a while, elites talked as if the nation-state was mostly an administrative shell. Markets were global, culture was fluid, identities were layered, borders mattered, but often in a technical sense. Then came migration shocks, terrorism, and social fragmentation. Suddenly, the state was expected to preserve order, preserve borders, preserve trust, preserve a national story people still want to live inside. That expectation is why this debate has become so emotional. Preservation is never just technical. Preserve what exactly? A language, a secular public sphere, a welfare model, a historical identity? People answer differently. But once preservation becomes the goal, politics changes character. It becomes more defensive. It becomes more willing to justify tough measures as necessary before it is too late. That feeling of lateness matters. Denmark sounds like a country acting before cohesion slips further. France sounds like a republic reasserting authority. Italy sounds like a state saying chaos elsewhere is warning enough. Japan sounds determined not to become an experiment in demographic reinvention. India sounds like a civilization state deciding its law. Czechia and Poland sound like countries saying they saw the West struggle and decided not to repeat the same path. In each case, leaders are telling voters, we still have time, but not forever. That is a powerful message. It creates urgency. It creates discipline. It turns debate into destiny. It also creates a temptation to simplify reality. If a country feels it is running out of time, it becomes easier to treat compromise as weakness. Rhetoric becomes intense. One side says, common rules for everyone. The other hears terms set by the majority. One side says we are defending secularism. The other asks why those values become loudest against minorities. One side says we are stopping parallel societies. The other hears that visible difference itself is dangerous. These are not small misunderstandings. They are rival moral narratives. An election's turn on which is more convincing. This is also why slogans about a war between the West and Islam fail to explain reality. It is too simple. France has millions of Muslim citizens who live ordinary lives. Denmark debate is tied to welfare state trust. Italy concerns are tied to migration routes. Japan anxieties extend to foreigners in general. India legal struggle is constitutional. Poland has a historic Muslim minority. Czechia posture is tied to sovereignty. Fold all of that into one slogan and you lose the truth. Simple slogans win clicks because they give certainty. They say there are clear heroes and villains. Real life is harder. Mass migration without integration can strain trust. Fear-driven policy can overreach. Some communities integrate successfully, yet some governments wait too long to confront tensions. National identity matters. Democracies are measured by how they treat minorities when public fear is high. That is why these 7 countries matter. They are all running different versions of the same experiment. Can a democracy tighten the rules of belonging without losing its moral center? Can it defend borders without suspicion? Can it speak honestly about failed integration without turning entire populations into objects of blame? Can it resist extremism without rewarding opportunists who thrive on division? No one has solved that yet. They are not finished models. They are live tests showing both the appeal and the cost of a harder turn. Denmark line appeals to voters who believe a welfare state requires cultural confidence. But critics warn of alienation. France firmness appeals to those who defend the republic from intimidation. But critics ask if pressure is uneven. Italy border politics appeal to those who value sovereignty. But critics warn that constant alarm flattens human complexity. Japan shows a country can keep migration low and still feel intense anxiety over identity and continuity. India shows that legal equality and minority autonomy can collide in ways that no slogan can resolve. Czechia and Poland show that voters may tolerate criticism if they believe domestic stability is the reward. But they also raise questions about what solidarity means and how selective openness is justified. Underneath sits an uncomfortable truth. The more citizens lose faith in institutions, the more they support harder lines. Trust is the variable that controls everything. If people trust the border, they panic less. If they trust newcomers will integrate, anxiety falls. If they trust safety and welfare, politics softens. But once trust breaks, every new arrival becomes politically heavier than the number alone would suggest. That is why symbolic issues like terror attacks, scandals, or viral stories matter so much. Each becomes proof of a larger story that millions are already primed to believe. Because social media magnifies emotional examples, the national mood can shift faster than official statistics do. Governments are moving toward selective openness. They want labor and investment, but with strict conditions and civic education. The message is, if you come, you enter an existing civic framework. You do not negotiate it from scratch. For many voters, that sounds fair. For many minorities, it sounds like acceptance with a warning attached. Maybe that is why the emotional tension around this issue never really fades. It is about dignity. Existing citizens want assurance their country will not dissolve. Newcomers want assurance belonging is not conditional. Democracies now have to satisfy both demands at once. That is very hard, and in some moments, impossible. If you made it this far, subscribe and share this with someone who thinks these debates are only about numbers. They are about trust, identity, law, and the emotional future of nations. So where does this go next? If current trends continue, more governments will study the models that look politically successful. Denmark integration will be discussed. France will debate policing networks. Italy will continue tying borders to sovereignty. Japan will walk the line between labor and caution. India will test whether uniform civil law expands or provokes backlash. Czechia and Poland will press for national discretion. The common direction is unmistakable, more control and more selectivity. But the outcomes depend on whether rules are felt as fair. If rules protect everyone, hard policy can sit inside democracy. If the rules look selective or humiliating, backlash will grow. The future may turn on that distinction. We should be honest. Some countries may stabilize trust. Some may drift into constant suspicion. The point is that the old answers no longer satisfy enough people to hold the center together. What does a nation owe the people inside? And what does it owe the people trying to come in? If a country owes almost nothing outward, politics becomes cold. If it owes too little inward, voters revolt. Serious democracies have to hold both obligations. They need order, trust, and moral seriousness. They must refuse to punish whole communities for the acts of a few. That balance is the real battlefield. The real battlefield is the line between firmness and fear. Cross too far, and the state starts to hollow out liberal principles. We should ask what these countries are trying to save and what price they may pay if they go too far. Denmark saves trust. France saves republic authority. Italy saves sovereignty. Japan saves continuity. India redefines equality. Czechia and Poland save control. These are the biggest political questions of our time. This issue is not fading. It is spreading. The old consensus on openness has weakened. What must be shared if a nation is going to remain governable, recognizable, and trusted by its own people? Some answers will age well, some will not. But no one can say they are ignoring the problem anymore. The future will be shaped by how nations define belonging under pressure. This is the road ahead. These 7 countries are writing the first draft of a new era where states are far less willing to gamble on integration. They are increasingly ready to tell citizens and newcomers that social cohesion is not optional. The debate over immigration and identity has arrived. These 7 nations are helping decide how the rest of the world responds.